Let me welcome you all to our panel this morning. And let me say initially, I'm Hank Phillippi Ryan. I am thrilled to be one of the guests of honor with the fabulous Katrina McPherson of this fantastic event, and so honored to be here and so proud to be here and so delighted to see you all today. Let me quickly say at the beginning that this is such a time of strife and terror and fear in the world. And our hearts go out to the people of Ukraine. The things like today, events like this that bring us all together, show us that stories can connect us and our books can connect us. And this is a way for us to stay in touch and communicate and share our experiences and humanity. This is a way for us to count our blessings, that we can pick a book that we want, whatever book we want, and curl up in the safety of our home and read it and not worry that when a helicopter flies overhead, something terrible is going to happen. Mornings like right now are when we can say we are grateful to be here. We are thankful for what we have. Our hearts go out to Ukraine, and it is always safe inside a book. So I welcome you all here this morning. We have a panel on reluctant sleuths, and the four authors on the panel this morning, and I will introduce them to you more carefully in a minute, are incredibly brave women, and here's why. They write books about an amateur sleuth, and I have to tell you that's brave, because if I walked down to the end of my driveway to get my newspaper in the morning and found a dead body at the end of my driveway, I would call the police. I would not, I mean, I'm a reporter. I would not investigate it. I would just call for help. And all of these women who write these wonderful stories know that, and know that at every minute during their story, some reader is going to say, why doesn't she just call the police, right? Mm-hmm. And these women have figured out a way to make that work. And that's what I hope they will share with us this morning, how to do that. And so we will start this morning with a quiz for you, for the audience. So get ready with your little chat fingers. Of these four authors, Terrie Farley Moran, wave Terrie. Woo. And I hope you all have your books with you. Do you have a copy of your book to hold up? All right, good. Terrie Farley Moran, wave. Ovidia Yu, Tina deBellegarde, and Alexia Gordon. Hold up your books at all turns, if you will. If you don't have them, we will get a copy of them on an iPad. So whose book has this first line? And it's an easy one because it's morning. Whose book has this first line? Jessica, I really think you should let me fluff up the top. My favorite hairdresser, Loretta Spiegel, used her fingers and a handle of a round-headed brush to push my ash blonde hair about an inch higher than I normally wear it. Exactly. And the votes are coming in. Terrie. That is marvelous. And of course, that is Terrie Farley Moran, and that is the beginning of Debonair in Death, book number 54 of Murder, She Wrote. I want to introduce Terrie more quickly in a minute, more succinctly in a minute, but let me ask you, Terrie, about having an amateur sleuth that everyone already knows. What's that like, and how do you create Jessica Fletcher again and again so gorgeously? What is it about her?
I can only tell you this. In 1984, when the first TV show came out, I watched the first episode. I was hooked. I felt like she was a friend. We used to be at my mother's house on Sunday night, and this is before DVDs and, streaming and all that stuff. And I'd be saying to the kids at 6:30, because Murder, She Wrote started at 8 o'clock. All right, come on, pack up your toys. We got to go home. And my husband would always say, we have plenty of time. And I'd be, no, there could be traffic on the bridge. So in a way, this is like, for me, I still watch on Hallmark Mysteries. I still watch her. I've been watching her all these years. This is like writing about a friend. So Dawn Bain, who started the series, did an excellent job with her. Then John Land came along, and he wrote, I think, 5 or 6 of the books. And when it was my turn, I just wrote about my friend Jessica.
That is such a sweet thing and such a wonderful way of looking at it. So you feel you know her. Is that right?
Yes,
And you've known her for a long time. And so talk
yes,
a little bit about finding new adventures for her. I mean, we were talking about, I mean, Cabot Cove
yeah,
is now the trope for, oh my gosh, the Cabot Cove syndrome. Don't
yes.
go to dinner at Jessica Fletcher's house because you will die. The stranger in town is going to die. How do you keep that so new? And you know
Here's
what? More than new, logical.
right. Here's what happened. Um, when Dawn got sick and John took the series, John kept her in Cabot Cove, but Dawn had her traveling all over as she does in the TV series. So my first thought was my first book cannot be in Cabot Cove.
Uh,
I need to move her around because the readers and me, we're used to that, she goes here, she goes there. So the first book I set in Columbia, South Carolina for a variety of reasons. The main one was she had never been there in any of the books.
so
And
hang on to that thought for a second because I
sure,
want to ask the other I want to ask the other authors and remind me about South Carolina. I want to ask the other
okay.
authors. Terrie was talking about writing about Jessica as a friend, that she felt like she was a friend. Do you feel that about your own main characters? How do you connect with, for instance, Alexia? How do you connect with Gethsemane Brown? How do you does she feel like your friend as well? And is that a key to writing a good amateur sleuth?
Like a friend. I honestly don't think I'd put my friends in the kind of danger I put her in. That wouldn't be very friendly to have murderers chasing after them. But I do feel that she's someone that I admire and that I want to see accomplish things. And she also gets the chance to do some of the things that not the finding dead bodies part, but some of the other things she does, some of the things that I wish I could do. So there's a little bit of wish fulfillment and a little bit of something I see her as someone that I admire and want to see her accomplish great things, more than as an actual friend who I actually would want to protect more than I protect her.
But when you're writing about her, and the people who are here today who are writing their own amateur sleuths, or might be thinking about it, what is it, Ovidia, that you can take from your relationship with Sulin to that makes you connect with her? What advice or what thoughts or what realizations have you come to about your main character that help you write her?
Actually, I think it went the other way around because I actually came to Sulin's character from going to funerals. Yeah, it's like my grandmother died, when my mother died. You will always see them as these old people who are very proper and tell you to do things and behave yourself and be safe. But when you get all their friends coming together and saying, you remember when we did this? Remember how crazy that was? Remember when we went there and we actually went swimming and they found a shoe and they thought the crocodiles ate us? And then you suddenly realize that these respectable old aunties were actually young girls who were torn apart by the war, by everything else in their time, and grew up to become who we knew them as. And Sulin's sort of in age between my grandmother and my mother. So she lived through the war when she was a bit older than my mom, but she's younger than my grandmother, so she could go off and do strange things and so on. My grandmother was very proud of being the first in her district to get a university degree, the first girl to be. And she never forgot that. So that was something for Sulin to carry as well, I think. And
Well,
it was the
yeah, it
sorry,
sounds
yes.
like from what you're saying is that you have mined your characters' pasts to make them be real people.
But
Real
they were real
people.
people. That's the
That's what
thing.
I
They're so
Yeah.
it's
that's
like I wanted to put in the life and the weird side of them and the naughty and the wicked side of them that I never saw when I was looking up to them as respectable old women. And now I'm
right.
older than they were then, it's quite terrible, but we wouldn't go in.
But you bring your character to life by giving her a past, by giving her a history and possibilities that she wants something and that she cares about something. That
Yes, but
you're
there's also a timelessness because she wants the same things as we all do now. And it's becoming even more relevant now because they were living under the threat of war, and then war came. And that's kind of where we are now. It feels like that war is looming and we keep saying it's nothing. Don't believe that the Japanese are here for nothing, except that this time it's Russians. So it feels like an echo. That's why it's becoming more and more scary now, actually.
And that is interesting that, yes, it is. And but that's interesting too, in creating an amateur sleuth. Amateur sleuths sometimes have, people sometimes think that they're silly and shallow, but all four of you write amateur sleuths who are not like that, who have a depth and have a timelessness, as Ovidia says. What's your relationship with Bianca, Tina? How do you make her come to life?
Well, Bianca certainly isn't me, but I took a lot of my experiences when I moved into my new community to create this person who was starting over. And so I have a lot of that, my own personal background that I bring to my character. I wanted her to be closer to my age because I thought I could relate to that better. And when I was at some of my conferences and we talked to, in workshops, a few people suggested, oh no, I had her starting at 52, decided she was too old. So, and I was a little uncomfortable with moving her age, but I did, and I'm glad I did. But my initial reaction was to be able to relate to her the best way possible was to put her in a frame of mind as much like mine as possible. But I realized that was perfectly possible 10 years ago or 20 years ago, because of course I've aged since I started writing Winter Witness, so I'm no longer 52 either. And so, and as far as being like friends, like Terrie said about Jessica, I feel that way about also in general about some of my other characters, because all of my characters, including Bianca, are composites of people I know. No character is an actual person I know, but they're all made up of several parts of other people. And so in many ways, I know how they might act, and I know their backstory, and I feel like I can sort of anticipate, I can hear in my head a little bit where I think they're going to go with something. And I do feel like I know them.
I mean, it's so interesting because I hear that from all of you, that you have, you understand your characters, you know them, you feel like you're friends with them, or you've had the same experiences that they've had. And I really think that's illustrative and educational for people who are writing characters like that, to make them be real people that have flaws and have faults and have things that they need. Let's go on with the quiz and see if we can figure out who wrote this one. All right, ready audience to vote on this. Who wrote this? During the Japanese occupation, radios were banned in Shionin, as our Japanese lord and master is referred to Singapore, and our only news came through their official channels until the flyers started appearing. What book? Who wrote that? Oh, I think I said during the Japanese occupation, and the answers started pouring in. These are too easy, you all. These are too easy. But isn't that interesting too, that you recognize what book this is just from the opening line? Again, in our masterclass yesterday, we talked about the importance of opening lines. And this is setting us, Ovidia, of course, is setting us in the Cannonball Tree mystery, setting us right there in time. But let's talk a little bit more about motivation. I was talking about how I wouldn't go investigate the body at the bottom of my driveway. How do you, Ovidia, for Su Lin, and then how do you all make it be logical for your characters to do what they do?
For me, they only do what they need to do to survive in that position. But can I argue with one point you said earlier?
Sure, always.
Sorry. You wouldn't call the police if you thought that the body beside your post box out there on the front of the road had some connection to the sister of yours who was missing for the past how many years, would you?
Well, let's talk about that. And I think it's really interesting because as I was typing that this morning, I thought, well, yes. What if it were someone I knew? What if it was my family? I still would call the police. but I'm a reporter, so let's take all the layers of that. I would still call the police, but I'm a reporter, so I would wonder about it. If it were somebody in my family, I would certainly do my own back channel investigation, but I would still call the police. I mean, there's a body at the end of my driveway. What am I going to do with that? So, and you see what I mean? So yeah, I totally agree with you. And this is the thing that we all, as mystery authors, have to deal with, is what would someone really do? And how do we
Right.
make that work in the book? So talk a little bit about Sulin, and then I want to hear about this from all of you.
For Sulin, it's purely survival, I think. And sometimes when you've lived under, okay, like we lived under the British for a long time, and there's telling the truth and there's telling the right answer, because sometimes if to survive, you have to say what they expect you to say back to them. And it was even worse under the Japanese. So there are truths and there are necessary things to say. Like if you say, are you hurt? You say no, because you don't want them to worry in one case. And in another case, you might, if they say, are you hurt? You say yes, because that means you can get off the field. So it's, truth depends on the, oh dear, this sounds like I'm a terrible liar, but
No, but it
you have
depends
to
on
know
the
what you're trying to
context.
do.
You're
If you're
right.
trying to survive, you say what you need to say to get the effect you need to survive one more day. And I think that's how it is for Sulin.
I love that, because that is all about motivation and all about psychology, which all of us who write mysteries need to know, because another thing that people will yell at books, besides why doesn't she just call the police, is why would she do that? Why would he do that? Alexia, how do you fold that motivation and psychology into what Gethsemane Brown does? How do you make it logical?
I mean, I started out by asking myself exactly that question. I was in some writing class a long time ago where, someone said, well, why wouldn't they just call 911? So when I write something, I think, well, I actually have to find a reason why they wouldn't call 911 or 999 in Ireland, I think. So by answering that question is how I make it logical. Like, I see, there were some suggestions in the chat. One is like, well, if it's your, say, knife sticking out of the body, and you're like the only person who could have had access to that knife, well, yeah, maybe I'm not calling the cops because they're going to blame me. Or sometimes I'll have the cops already there, and I guess somebody's not necessarily the one who found the body, but she's the one who's either blamed for it or her friend's blamed for it, so she gets involved because the cops are going down the wrong road. So I actually start out with exactly that question: why is she here right now? Why doesn't she just let the Garde handle it? And it's like, well, because they're blaming her, they're blaming her friend, they're barking up the wrong tree. She's got something to lose by, so she can't just sit back and let somebody else do it because they're doing the wrong thing or blaming the wrong person.
Exactly. And that's what people are saying in the chat as well. Mim is saying sometimes you can call the police, but not trust them to figure out. Susan says, what if you would expect the police to blame you? Robert says, what if the body was a body that implicated the police? All these things. And this is why we do what we do, right? This is why we write mysteries, because we can think of all these things. Terrie, how close to the surface is it that you have to figure out, and how difficult, why Jessica would yet again do this?
It's top of mind. I wrote 7 other books before I started writing Jessica's books, and they were all cozies. They were all amateur sleuth. And the most important thing before you start is to know why your amateur sleuth would have a response. And the most important one is usually that someone is being looked at very closely by the police and it's a good friend. Or the murder happened basically in front of you. You found the dead body by your mailbox, and that you're implicated by virtual location of body. So there's so many reasons why but you can't just say it. You have to show that the impact that this particular death had on your amateur sleuth, by her finding the body or by a good friend found, as in Debonair, a good friend, not even a friend, but somebody that she really liked, a manicurist. I'm not giving anything away. Amazon will tell you that. Was the first person locked up for the murder. So Jessica had no choice but to try to go in and rescue this young girl. You basically put your amateur sleuth in a position where he or she feels as though they do not have a choice.
That's
It's not like oh, I could go bowling with my friends or I could solve a murder. This is in front of you and it has to be addressed.
I hope you all, I
Because
hope you all, I hope you are all writing this down, because this is just golden information and things that we should be thinking about every minute as we're writing. Tina, let me ask you about Bianca then. How do you deal with that?
Well, I do it a couple of ways. I did a sort of an end run around the problem of why is she doing this, because I feel that the small town, real little hamlet is a really great place for an amateur sleuth to work hand in hand with authorities, because I live in a really, really small town and it's not very, it's just not that unlikely that someone and the sheriff would be friends, might chat, might actually collaborate, even though you're not actually investigating. But it's not so far-fetched. So I felt like we all can do that a little bit with the smaller towns. And also in a small town, there's gossip. Everybody knows everybody. And
Let's go back to, I want to go to the setting a little bit separately, but I want to think about Bianca's motivation when you think about her. Because just as Terrie was saying, she might say, well, let the police solve that. I'm not going to do that. What is it that you've made Bianca be? What's in her head that makes her be the one that's going to talk to the sheriff, and her be the one that's going to feel like she must help with this?
Yeah, I think that what happens to her is she is an outsider who's new to the community. So her ability to see things a little differently, like somebody had mentioned in the chat that maybe the police might be involved, doesn't necessarily mean they'll figure it out. And what she's bringing to the table, even if it sometimes unintentionally, is a vision that's a little different than somebody else. So she sees things differently. And because, I know we don't want to talk about setting, but because it's a small town, the stakes are high always, because everybody does know everybody. So there's always somebody that she's either protecting or she's concerned about. So her motivations are sort of just built in. She's alone, so her community is everything to her now.
So all of you have talked about emotions. All of you have talked about emotion and friendship or protection or the feeling of a bigger picture in solving this, that there's a human connection with whatever has happened. Do you feel that? And is that top of mind for all of you? Anyone who wants to answer that?
yeah, I would say absolutely. Because, well, this is just me. I read cozies exclusively, pretty much. And that's why I write them. And the thing I always like about cozies is you get emotionally involved with the characters. If I read a thriller, I get emotionally involved with the characters in a sense of fear. If I read a cozy, I get emotionally involved with the character in a sense of caring, of supporting them, of cheering them on.
Oh, that's Terrie, that is quite brilliant. You see your fellow panelists nodding in agreement with that, the cheering them on element. Ovidia, does that resonate with you?
That resonates a lot, I think. Not in my writing, but I see it in Terrie's writing, I think. Though it's not just a sympathy, I get a lot more. Like when there's one, it's not a giveaway, but when I think Jessica puts her rippled Afghan around the friend who's turned up in the middle of the night, I had to stop and look up what a rippled Afghan was. So I learned about crochet patterns, and I've actually ordered some wool. And that was a whole sidetrack, because it became so much more about the caring and the looking after, and she's just a caring person, and she cares about people around her. Yeah,
So,
and I found
talk about
crochet stuff from you, so
that's great.
thank you.
Sorry
about the digression, Hank.
No, I love that. Whole new hobbies come from reading books. I love that. But Alexia, talk a little bit about that compassion and caring and that element of your stories.
The reason I had hesitated at first to answer your questions, I had to think about it, is did a strong desire for a sense of justice constitute an emotion? And then I decided that it does, because that's what motivates both my writing and the books that I choose to read, because as you pointed out earlier, the real world doesn't always work out that way. I mean, in the real world, somebody can just invade someone else's sovereign nation and be surprised that other people are upset about it. That doesn't happen in books, especially in cozies. There's this sense that no matter how dark things are going for your characters right now, in the end, there's going to be some sense of justice, and the bad guy's going to get it. And let's be honest, you're going to be happy when the bad guy gets it. And in cozies, even some of the murder victims, most of the time they're people that you're not necessarily shedding tears over. You hate to admit that, but it's true.
That's the world you all create, is that there is a good guy and there's a bad guy, and unlike the real world, we're rooting for the good guy. Unlike the real world, it's not all cut and dried. It is cut and dried in the book. Surprising, suspenseful, unpredictable. It's not, that's why we read them also, because we don't know what the end is going to be. But there is this core feeling, don't you think, Tina, that in the end, everything will be okay? Maybe not in the way that you could have predicted because the author is smart and wise, but everything will be okay somehow.
Yeah, I think that I end all of my books, all of them. I'm ready, my third one. It's so exciting to say that. It's not 20, but it's 3, and I'm excited about that. But I do end them with a celebratory tone, usually a gathering, and not everything is wrapped up in a bow in my books, but generally justice is served, whether it's the letter of the law or not. At least justice, the good people are still good. And I do have a little bit of more gray area. There are a lot of characters who do things that are, not to be admired, but they have reasons, and but by the end of the book, you seem to understand motivations, I think, and you know that mostly everybody will be fine, and they will start again fresh.
Yes, and I think that this is something, and let me just digress myself a little bit here, is that in a series, as you all write series, in a series, the plot of each book has to finish, but the arc of the character will continue. And I see you all nodding about that too. Ovidia, we'll start with you. Why do you think, what kind of a juggle is that as a series writer? And how do you think about that?
It's like, well, every year has to finish, but your life goes on, and you need some kind of end up to things. But there are, oh dear, talking about like TV shows, there are season arcs and there are episode arcs. So your season arc is like every 3 books or every 6 books, and your episode arc is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I think you need both, because you want people to go on and have some sense of continuity going on to the next one, as well as I finished this book and I can finally go and do the housework.
And for instance, in Terrie's case with Jessica Fletcher, we sign on to read the next Jessica adventure, sort of what is she up to now as her life continues. Talk a little bit about how you think about that.
Well, actually, can I do South Carolina now, or are we going to wait for
No, you do
setting?
this.
Okay.
Oh no, let's wait for setting for that. I'm trying to juggle telling people about how you think about series.
Because the way I look at it in her particular case, which is why I started with the South Carolina, is that very much part of the way she lives her life depends on where she is at the moment. When I wrote my first series, the girls were always in Fort Myers Beach. So whatever happened in Fort Myers Beach, happened in the cafe, the bookshop, the library, wherever they were. In this case, the setting, so we'll talk about setting later, but that's part of the motivation. You have to figure out where she's going to be, and then what could happen where she's going to be.
But each story, each book the plot of each book is finished.
Start to finish, and if you're really lucky and she isn't in Cabot Cove, she goes back to Cabot Cove for the last chapter.
So I'm just sort of getting at this sense of completion for each individual book. You
Yes.
don't end your books with a cliffhanger
No.
about who done it to get to
No.
talk a little bit about that,
No.
Alexia.
Oh, sorry.
I approach it from the and part of it's because I grew up reading Golden Age mysteries and watching Jessica Fletcher on TV. I still remember that Sunday nights. But the mystery itself, I actually plot separately and design it to finish within that same book, because I like that sense of, okay, we started it, we figured out what's going on, we ended it. But also knowing that I'm writing a series, a lot of these stories, cozies especially, they're ordinary people where this dead body drops into their ordinary lives. Their ordinary lives don't stop. So that's where the character arc comes in, because I still have to figure out, like, well, okay, what's she doing in between the times when she's not finding dead bodies or getting her friends out of trouble? And that's the character arc. Well, she's got a job to go to. She's got a family back home in Virginia that she's got to deal with. So the background stuff that's going on, into which the dead body falls, forms the overarching theme, and then the actual mystery itself is self-contained within one book.
Oh, I love that. So what I'm hearing is, to write an amateur sleuth like this, you need to make sure that your sleuth has a life outside the book, that the book is the adventure that she's having that's important for us to know about, but that she lives otherwise. That's so brilliant. That's so brilliant. Tina, do you think about finishing each story and continuing Bianca's life arcs in a way?
I do. I think that I don't end a book on a cliffhanger, except maybe on an emotional or romance cliffhanger, right? So those emotions aren't tied up. Any kind of romantic questions are not tied up. Bianca had financial issues. Those are not tied up. All of those things are not, but the mystery itself that was discussed in the book, or the murder, or whatever, those threads are tied up. Now, there are characters in my book that don't just go away after they've been found guilty or whatever. They might recur because they might be part of the village or something like that. So
Sure.
they have an impact on the people they've left behind. And so that's not tied up. So I try to keep them alive. I just think it's more interesting for my readers to come back and find out how everybody is doing after the fact.
But you're all invested in making sure that your readers get a satisfying ending for each individual book. So at the end of a book, you say, "Oh, good book." So you don't say, "What?" Well, I need to know what happened. Let me go on with the quiz before we run out of time. Who wrote this? He inched toward the precipice, his toes gripping the stone ledge as if they had a will of their own. He lifted his head and squinted into the sunlight, still streaming through the blackening clouds. He took in the expanse of rushing water below. In all his 18 years, Trevor had never seen the creek roil so ferociously. Who wrote that? Who wrote that? Come on, let's see the guesses. Oh, now people are not. Oh, there's a big battle going on because there are only two of you left. Oh, shall I put a stop to this? Put a stop to this? Okay, this is Tina deBellegarde's Dead Man's Leap. And if you look at the cover of her book behind her, Dead Man's Leap, and look what I just read. Of course, that is what it's about. Setting. So let's talk about setting. All of you have stories that take place in a closed setting, in whatever the closed setting turns out to be for you. Tina, let's start with you. Why did you choose where you chose, Batavia-on-Hudson, and why is that important to have that closed community?
To me, it was so important because I always wanted to write an amateur sleuth, but I felt like it needed to be small town. And when I moved to the Catskills, I found my small town. I realized that my type of story is character driven. And if it's going to be character driven, those characters have to matter. We need to get to know them. And the best way to get to know them is to place them in a small community. So it's my Cabot Cove, right? And I do worry about Cabot Cove syndrome, right? But I'll worry about that when I have more books out. Right now, people can die in Batavia and Hudson. And so for me, that setting was important. And because it's actually as beautiful as it is on the surface, as serene, it is a dangerous place to be, right? There are cliffs and waterfalls, and there are paths in the woods, and there's extreme weather, and there are just walking down the road with careening trucks on winding roads are dangerous. I mean, there were so many ways to set a murder in my setting that I decided that this was just perfect. It was quaint and dangerous at the same time.
And also the connections of the people. Talk a little bit about that, Tina. You were talking earlier when I stopped you so impolitely, talking about how everyone knows everyone. Why is that important?
And that is so important because I feel that my reader can get invested in those particular characters so quickly. And because it really is I believe it's character driven. And so they need to be important to us. We need to get to know them. And we do, because there are just so many of them, and they rely on each other in so many ways, particularly so in the second book, in Dead Man's Leap. You can see the connections of how people rely on each other even more. And also the setting sort of forces the community involvement, sort of like, you know, the way in Louise Penny's book, she has her inspector. I have a sheriff, but he's not my main character. Bianca and the rest of the village are. And in Three Pines, the villagers always manage to get involved in those mysteries. And that's what happens in my stories, that not only is Bianca investigating, but in a way she has help from the community, because people are always stumbling on things. People talk, things happen that reveal, and that can only happen because you're always the exchanges are always with the same people, right?
So Ovidia, I'm trying to not to give everybody the same amount of time before running out of time. Impossible. But Ovidia, Tina was saying that sort of the community situation forces the involvement, and that's what you have as well. Talk a little bit about that, your special community.
Our community is very mixed. That's why people say, oh, they speak English, it's okay to communicate that. But actually in one day, in one sentence even, you speak English, Malay, Chinese, and probably a bit of Tamil or Hindu, depending on what you're eating at the time. So the community is formed by, we're all immigrants in a way, or descended from immigrants. And if you as an outsider come in and decide to stay, you automatically become one of us. Do you know what I mean? If you're willing to stay and you're willing to try our foods and you decide you can. So the community is purely not from birth or inherited status or anything, but if you stay, if you're willing to be absorbed, you get absorbed. And the good thing about that is there's less judgment. The bad thing about that is, in a way, everybody has pasts elsewhere. So there's a lot of problems with, okay, but you were asking me about the clues and murders, right? Not living in societies anyway. But it comes through because you suddenly say, oh, so-and-so came in and I saw him eating at what stall, which doesn't work because it's so strange, because either you are Muslim or you're vegetarian or what, and it doesn't fit. So things that you take for granted, if you go a little out of your way and you eat a food from the wrong hawker stall, everybody talks about it. Just, I saw. And then that gets back to the person who says, you know, oh, so he can't really be that, you know, he might pretend to go to the mosque, but he's not Muslim.
Oh, that's so interesting. So you go ahead.
People would know that somehow. It just is inside you, and you wouldn't even think you're passing on information.
So the use of community itself as clues is so brilliant. And Alexia, you have a really fascinating community. Talk about fish out of water, that Gethsemane goes where she goes, and takes over the place that she takes over. We'll let you tell about it. How did you create that community, and why is that important?
Well, I created mine is actually fictional, and I did that just so I'd have control over it. But I did put it in a place, you know, my book has ghost in it. So I chose Ireland because it seemed like ghost would not seem, I don't want the ghost to be the remarkable thing about my book. So it was either Ireland or New Orleans. So I picked one of the two most haunted places I could think of. But the town itself, you know, as Tina and Ovidia have already alluded to, that small towns have a gossip network that can be, perfect for spreading clues and red herrings and misinformation. So that aspect of it was part of it. The fact that my character was from somewhere else coming into this closed community, I use that. I guess I sort of went with the darker aspects of small towns and closed communities. There's this image. One of the things that always makes me crazy when I'm listening to true crime or news broadcasts when someone says, we didn't think that kind of thing could happen here. It's like, well, why didn't you? Some small towns have some of the most horrific crimes and awful people ever. They just get covered up. And so that sort of darker aspect of the small town was part of why I chose that. So that it's, if you read like Agatha Christie, who I was certainly influenced by, if you read it closely, this bucolic English village, really, there's a great book out now called How Not to Get Murdered in an English Village, because it's only bucolic on the surface. And I wanted to dig underneath that surface and show that, some of that closeness leads to, grudges and malicious gossip and infighting and all of these things that can then in turn lead to somebody shooting somebody or poisoning somebody or stabbing somebody. And if you're an outsider, it really is, in a lot of places, hard to then become an insider, which can have its advantages and its disadvantages. That you get a different perspective, but people also don't necessarily trust you. You have to kind of work harder to get people to tell you things.
I love that. And people also sort of excuse people. Oh, that's Jimmy. He always breaks into the drugstore every Wednesday when he runs out. And, give people a pass on that when someone from the outside would say, you let him rob the store? That sort of thing. So that outsider perspective on the small community also is interesting. Exactly as Ovidia was saying, you can tell who doesn't belong. And Bianca comes fish out of water, into a new place, and gives it with her fresh eyes. She sees what might be going on. And Terrie has tamed setting, absolutely, knowing that this is one of the things that may have haunted her in writing Jessica Fletcher. How have you dealt with that and letting people not let you into Cabot Cove every minute of every day?
Yeah, it was an issue. There's two separate issues. Issue number one is there's a whole fan base of the TV shows that prefer the Cabot Cove episodes. I am one of them. So that I always I was always happy when she was home in Cabot Cove, right? But in the books, she continued to travel. So when I took over the series, since the previous 5 or 6 books had been in Cabot Cove, I felt obligated to send her someplace else. And I sent her to Columbia, South Carolina, because I had just been there like the year before. So I was like, I was familiar with it. One of the things I did, though, was go through all the books and find out where she was. Like, I've read all the books, but you don't remember. So I have a list. I have all the towns. So I wrote Debonair was the second book I wrote, and I sent her back to Cabot Cove, but my Cabot Cove, not John's, not Dawn's, my old Cabot Cove that I love. But then I wanted her to go to New York to see Grady and Donna and their son, Frank, who's named after her husband, Frank. But I didn't want her in Manhattan. She's always in Manhattan. So I sent her to the beach in Rockaway. That book
it's just a question of making sure that you give your readers what they want, your main character,
right,
a place that's either familiar or interesting, exactly,
or someplace they're gonna really enjoy the place as much as they enjoy what she does. I know they're gonna love Cabot Cove. I could just write about Cabot Cove forever, but that's not how she lives her life.
Perfect.
She goes to book conferences. She goes all over the place visiting friends. She's got more ex-college roommates than I ever heard of.
That's great. But you see, you've done that and you've created and that's such a clever way of creating the motivation for her to be somewhere else. Let me do my last, I know this is going to be the super easy one, but let's go on. And then I want to take the questions that some of you have asked. Who wrote this one? The afternoon sun shone bright over the village of Dunmulloch in the southwest of Ireland. The fragrance of wildflowers, clover, honeysuckle, valerian, wafted on a gentle breeze over the cliffs of Carrick Point. And then we meet a ghost, which is so amazing. And that is, of course, Execution in E by Alexia Gordon. Let's talk briefly. You know what? I was going to talk about titles for a minute, but one of you has a question. Let me look and see. Rosemary asks, how soon did you involve your amateur sleuth in the first book of your series? So Alexia, let's take Gethsemane. Rosemary wants to know, did she immediately jump in and start solving, or did it take a while? What a great question.
For the first book, I mean, she was immediately introduced, but it took a while for her to start solving the mystery. It took a while for the mystery to show up. As a lot of my fellow panelists have alluded to, part of what draws people to this particular genre of crime fiction is the community of characters. So you kind of have to get people to care about the characters first. I mean, cozies aren't really a body on the first page sort of genre,
Right.
because you have to meet everybody, even the ones that you end up not liking that much. You have to get involved enough with them that you care when they end up dead. You have to, I mean, if you're going to hate somebody, you have to know them a while to hate them. And so then you're kind of glad they ended up with a knitting needle in their ear or whatever it was. So the especially in the first book, the murder tends to come in a little later. Now in the further books in the series, I could bring the murder in a little bit earlier because people kind of already knew the characters, but definitely in the first book, Murder in G Major, it was a while before someone died because you had to meet the people to see even, who's gonna die and make that something that matters to you.
And because we know we write cozies and we know it's a murder mystery, so we know there wouldn't be a book unless someone gets killed eventually, and that's sort of the contract that you're making with the reader, that someone's going to get killed. Tina, how much did you think about why in the first book, Bianca, how long did it take for her to be the one to be involved?
It took her a little while for the same reason that Alexia mentioned. I felt that the readers needed to get to know the town just like Bianca was doing. Bianca's an outsider, so she was getting to know people. And as she learned more about the community, and then a second event happened, she started to put pieces together. So she kind of stumbled into sleuthing, right? She still in book 2 and book 3 doesn't consider herself a sleuth. She just happens to gather information and have some insight. So it took her a little while. She didn't start right off the bat.
And Ovidia, Sue Lin, was she, the title of this seminar is Reluctant Sleuth. Was Sue Lin reluctant?
Oh, totally. I mean, she was reluctant to get married. That's why she ended up working for the detective, and she ended up working as a governess for a retarded child. I know that's not the PC term. I can't remember what it should be, but she was working there, and then she was just reluctant about everything, except she just didn't want to get married to a much older man who already had a family, and she didn't want to get blamed for a murder that happened in front of her. So she decided to fight against that and find out who actually killed the person.
Exactly, the motivation, and we understand that. And Jessica Fletcher, Terrie, you were presented with a person who already solved mysteries. So that was something that you didn't really have to deal with.
Absolutely. Nobody ever picks up a Murder, She Wrote book and expects her not to be involved in resolving a murder. Although I will say the first one that I wrote, Killing in a Koi Pond, I forget whether it's chapter 1 or 2, where she's out for a jog and she discovers the body. And people did send me emails and say, that was much too soon. We didn't know the other characters as well, because she wasn't in Cabot Cove. She was in South Carolina. So
that's revealing.
I mean, people, everybody here knows you get emails on every single thing that you do. And, some people agree, some people don't. Whatever they say, I say, thank you very much for letting me know. And, that's exactly. It. But that was a significant issue for other people. And I thought exactly what Hank said. This is book number 53. She's going to find a dead body. Or, someone's going to die. Like, what? Why
it's called Murder, She Wrote, for goodness sake.
Yeah, that's the title.
And speaking of our sleuths, Virginia Kelly is asking a really good question too, which is, what do you think? And let me make sure I get her question exactly right. What most of the amateur sleuths are older. What about a 30-something amateur sleuth? Well, that's an interesting question, because when I started writing my first book, Primetime, starring Charlotte McNally, who was a television reporter in Boston, wonder where I got that idea, and I made her. And my agent said to me, this book is so great. We can sell this instantly because the world is ready for an older amateur sleuth, an older sleuth, an older main character, someone who's competent and worldly and experienced and successful already and knows what she's doing. And then she says, how old is she really? How old is Charlie McNally? And I said, I made her my age. This was 15 years ago. I said, I made her my age. She's 55. And my agent goes, oh,
Well,
that's too old. I'm like, it's my age. So I said to her, and I remember this so clearly, I said, how about 46? Is 46 too old? And she says, no, 46 is okay. So all of you should know that 46 is okay. But
Okay.
in
I'll
thriller
remember
world,
that. Thanks.
so what do you think about age of main character?
Oh, I'd want to answer this one, because I think I started to mention it earlier. When I was at a workshop, suggested my main character was 52. The agent sitting there said, oh, no. Because I didn't say the whole thing before. That won't make her romantically viable. You need her to be younger. And I was trying very hard to just be polite and nice, because I was offended because I was 52 at the time. And I said, romantically viable at 52? Of course she's romantically viable. So like I said, I started her at 42, but I really wanted her to be in her 50s, even later 50s. I thought that was just a brilliant place to start, right? With someone like your editor was saying, someone knowledgeable and has the life experience and all that stuff. So I'll let someone else chime in.
Somebody's saying, Aubrey is saying, OMG, romantically viable puke. But it is interesting that was 15 years ago. That was 15 years ago when 55 was too old. And I wonder whether that would be true now. I kind of doubt it. Alexia, what do you think? You look like you're ready to say something.
I would say, I think the pendulum is actually shifting back the other way, because I commented to somebody in the chat that there was a period where the standing joke was that every cozy sleuth was 29 years old. It was always it was a 29-year-old or who left their glam big city life to move back to a small town and take over the family business, and almost everyone seemed to be like that. And so some of us are like, why is everybody 29? I'm older than 29 and I'm not dead yet. And now it seems like it's kind of shifting back with people like, Only Murders in the Building, for example. Those, 2 of the 3 are in their 70s. And somebody, pointed out Richard Osman's book about the, being set in a retirement home. So I think it comes in waves. There's, everybody has to be super young, and then, well, hey, maybe 46 is okay. And then, well, maybe 70 is okay, because, people are living longer and we're trying to be less ageist and things like that. So it sort of depends on which decade of cozies I think you're looking at as to where the amateur sleuth age range falls. Because if you go back all the way back to Agatha Christie, Miss Marple is probably what, 80, and Hercule Poirot's in that age range too. Jessica was a woman of a certain age, so I think
what
it comes
is that
in waves.
Certain age? I mean, she never gets any older, does she?
No, she never changes. And it's very difficult because you can't write her in a time frame. Like, you can't put her in. To many people, it's still the 80s or the 90s. I do have her texting and stuff like that, and I got called out for that too. But I mean, I had a phone that I could do texting in the 80s, and no, I'm sorry, in the 90s. So you have to be very careful with that. I just finished last night at 7:30 a manuscript that I have to hand in Monday. And Alexia, I'm in Northern Ireland in this book, but I had to avoid the Troubles. I had to avoid Brexit. I had to avoid anything that, would give a time frame, given the history of Northern Ireland and the things that have gone on there in the last 30 years. So I just avoided all of it. because, and that's true in any book that you write. You can't mention who the president of the United States is if you're here. You can't mention anything because she lives in a time bubble. She stays exactly the same.
She lives in Jessica world, in Jessica
Yes,
time. And you
everybody keeps saying they just want to, you know, have her, what is somebody say, they want Loretta Spiegel, her hairdresser, they want Loretta to do their hair so they always look, you know, the same. Jessica on the cover of every book. She's, I mean, the woman is 96 years old now, but you know, she's still way younger than me here, and she always will be. It just is, it's the way. I'm not sure that Universal Studios expected that we would still be doing books and TV shows. And I mean, this is, you know, so you see her how she is. That's all I can say.
that is that we are out of time. Ovidia, Tina, Alexia, Terrie, thank you so much for this. For all of you who are writing amateur sleuths, didn't we learn a lot about this? Just like journalism, who, what, when, where, why, all so important in writing your amateur sleuth books. Please look at the chat, you all. You're all getting such accolades. We've talked about Alexia's podcast. Look for that. Please, if you have any questions, I know all of these authors will be available throughout the seminar for you to chat with in the chat. And I am Hank Phillippi Ryan. I am so grateful for your wonderful contributions today. Thank you all so much for being so authentic and generous to us all. And we will see you at the next panel. Tina, do you want to tell us what's next?
The next panel is at 11:45, Just My Cup of Tea, American Authors Writing British Mysteries. Carol Puglia will be moderating. Connie Berry, Jessica Ellicott, Marnie Graff, and Clara McKenna will be on. It'll be wonderful. Hank, thank you. You are a terrific moderator.
My pleasure.
Wonderful time on panel. Thank you. And all my fans.
See you next time.
So long.